Zero. So I'm super paranoid about it. This is crazy. What's that? What was your question? Oh my God, everyone's so smart here. So I burnt out before the industry burned out. Like, I don't know about that. It's magical. Panic attacks.
Welcome to the next episode of In China Between Meetings with your host, Marian Danka. I'm extremely excited today to have on the right Rasmus Rasmusson, who is the founder and CEO of VÄRM and LeWorks. We're going to talk a little bit more about the companies, about your projects. But first of all, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And I know that you started your entrepreneurial journey back in late 90s, where we had the dot-com bubble. So can you please tell me, what did you do? What were your early first projects and what did you learn at that time?
I actually started right before the dot-com bubble because at the time internet was very empty. The web had hardly any content. It was just sort of business cards on the web, and all the interesting content was on the BBSs you dialed into a server. So this is mid-90s. And it was a time when people hardly used emails. They sent an email and then they called you to see that you got it, The interesting part of internet was really Usenet, and that's what I was doing, just chatting on, debating politics and stuff. And Usenet was essentially what Reddit is today. But so my friends started a web company called Digerati, a web design company, and I thought it was silly because it was like, why would you build business cards online for companies? And but then they asked me to help them with sales, so I moved into their office and I started helping them with telesales, telemarketing, while I was writing paper for the university. And I wanted to basically take that Usenet experience and put it on a website and call it politicalwatch.com, which I still have, but I never launched it. So that was the start. And then the dot-com era started, in the media, which went quite quick. So from nobody understood what internet was when I called them or met them, then people like, oh, it's very interesting, So the dot-com era started and everyone wanted to talk to you. So it was quite fascinating time. What was your question?
What was the first company?
So the company, yeah. So Digerati was a web design company, and we helped them build, websites, just basic ones. But I realized very quickly that my job as a salesperson was to educate people on what internet was, but primarily paint a vision, because it was nothing. It was just business cards. Like, people looked at the website and like, I don't know, what did we do with this, And then I thought, okay. So I got very good at visionary talk, like looking at trajectories, what's going to happen in your industry. I met all these interesting companies, everything, like media companies and industry companies and everything, right? And for everyone, I had to understand their business and I had to paint a vision for them. So that became my sales pitch thing to do. But one of the things I looked at was communication. Communication will be very important for sales. This is going to be a great sales tool. And I thought you should use your website as a business, like a PowerPoint essentially, but then you talk to your customer on the phone, and then you both look at your website, and then you can show stuff. But it was clunky that you couldn't show things. They had to click on the right side of your screen, and then, it felt like a clunky experience. So then I convinced a friend of mine who was a programmer to design a little application, web application, where you could change the content of the other person's web browser. You sent a URL to a person, and then they could look at it, and you could change the content of the browser, which now sounds very, of course you can do that. But back then it was like, the internet was so static, so it was unheard of. Like, you could do that. They were like, it's magical. You showed this prototype to people. I remember I went to WorldCom, this now Finnish company, and I showed this prototype to them where I sat in one conference room. I called them up and they sat in the other room, and I sent them a URL, and then they looked at it, and I kept changing the content of the browser, and they're like, oh my God, it's like magic, And so that led to a pivot of the company Digerati to be to do that, to create this essentially early version of Skype, and we got funded, and the .com for me started, and that was super exciting. But it was my first job, and I had no sense of life work balance, so I sort of got these huge, what is it called, I crashed. I basically had panic attacks. So I kept
Wow.
fainting. And I couldn't, it was so bad that eventually I couldn't go to work. I couldn't leave my apartment, so I had to quit my job. So I was home
That's
for
insane.
Yeah, I was home for three. So I burnt out before the industry burned out. So my dot-com crash was like in the middle of it, yeah. And I just sort of had to quit the job and sit at home for 3 months. I played computer games for 3 months. And I just sort of, I need to stay another job that is not as crazy. So that was the big, but that company, they eventually sold it. We didn't make money on it, but it still got 3 rounds of funding, I think. So, yeah.
What was the second one?
Oh, then,
Fifth Element?
no, yeah. Well, first I was then recruited by this company called Knowit, which had been a booming IT company in the early 90s in Sweden, and it was a listed company. It was like the fastest growing IT company, but they were a client server company, consultants. So they had very good engineers, but they had not worked on internet before, and they were now, from having been the darling of the business media, they were like, you guys are the old style, because now here comes the internet consultants, which was basically kind of bad programmers that were just good at talking, you know. Since I was exactly that, a kind of bad programmer who was good at talking through my years of visionary talk to all these companies, they're like, oh, this guy could help us. So they hired me to help them retain their customers before they lost them to the internet consultants, and to get new customers. So basically combining their experience and engineering ability with my sort of visionary talk on how you can do things. So that was really cool. And then they quickly gave me my own company, so which I then called Fifth Element. So I started a web design company for them that was essentially there to help them retain their customers and get new ones. And that was really cool, because then I get to meet the biggest companies, like big banks and insurance companies, and we got through, and so I could apply that visionary talk to them. So I went into the banks and said, you know, your future is mobile payments, and I went to the Swedish radio and I said, your future is radio on the mobile phone. The word podcast was used for other things back then, but it was, which was funny because most of them were so conservative. You know, like the banks were like, I don't know about that, and the radio was like, no, we don't believe in that. Our future is DAT or something, which is this idiotic electronic radio that had a little BMP picture on it that you could show the icon of the radio show. That they thought that was their future. So that I learned a lot through these years from meeting with so many companies and learning also about technology. So that really was a very educational start for me. So that Knowit was then, that was sort of I joined that company as in the middle of the dot-com crash. So one of the companies that I went and pitched to was the Swedish Postal Office. And I painted a future for them where they, of course, would go under with their letter, but they had a better future with e-commerce package delivery. And then I painted a picture of how they would be the fantastic logistics company. They would have a fleet of trucks moving up and down the street, and just have guys running in and out of stores, picking up trash, leaving packages, picking up people's, checking luggage for the airport. And, you know, like, that's what you guys do. Start it now. Invest in building this fantastic logistics machine, and you're going to dominate the world. And they thought that was so cool. They presented it to the head of the postal office, and they said, well, let's hire this guy. And I said, no, because I believe in the future of IT industry. And a month later it started crashing. So I was like, oh shit. And that was an interesting year.
What's your China story? I know you're one of those who've been here for quite some time. So you came in 2003 in Shanghai. So what was the motivation?
Well, actually to Hong Kong. So what happened was the dot-com crash started, I was very early to see it coming without realizing what it was, because I looked in our spreadsheets, our funnels, sales tools, and saw that our incoming leads, qualified leads, were not very good. They were actually zero at the point, and that meant that 6 months later we would have no work with my little company. So I said, okay, man, we got to do something. So I fired a person, and I was called into the CEO of this company and said, we don't fire people here, we're building. We need to recruit, because it was all about building up. And I'm like, I showed her my sales funnel. I was like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, okay, fine, you can fire the person. And sure enough, a month later, we started firing 70% of the company. It just came down like so quick. It was unbelievable. And so, and then a few months went past. I then hired a telemarketing company to do market research on the future of our industry, or what we could do. We called every single company in our market in the greater Stockholm region and asked them, what are your IT investment for the next 12 months? And they said, zero. we have no investment in the next 12 months. And I'm like, this is crazy. We just fired 70% of the staff. We have a zero market in the next 12 months. There is nothing I can do. They're going to fire me next. So I better get out of here. And so then I moved to Hong Kong. I was hired by a company called EF Education first. I was hired to their failed.com called Englishtown, which had been in Boston, and they had raised money for it. And they decided at the crash of the IT industry, or the .com bubble, that they would make it for profit and move it closer to what they thought would the big markets would be in East Asia. And so I joined in Hong Kong in a sort of marketing position to help establish that. Our big market was Japan, but we still had a little office here in mainland China, and there were sort of franchise schools in the EF brand, but there was very limited work, and there was no real business in China. We couldn't figure out what to do with China. So that's how I first ended up in China, or in Hong Kong at the time. Yeah.
If you can recall, so you've been here for a while, right? So you see early days, 2000 plus. If you can think about 2, 3, 5 big changes that you've seen over these years, right? Shanghai then, or China then, and China now.
Yeah, I think the big difference is, well, in my field of online marketing. So I was in content marketing mainly. And so EF got its license in 2005 for education. So then we decided to make this product, or I didn't, but someone did, decided to make a product that was a blended version of the franchise schools and the online product that I worked on. We called it Smart, and the first one we opened in Shanghai on People's Square. And then, and that was, I think it was 2005. And then the company decided to put in a ton of money because China is going to be the growth market. So this is when I really entered China. Before that, I just happened to be in China. We had programmers here. We got 100 people, I think, in Greater China. But our markets were Japan and Brazil and Europe. But then everything changed. So at this time, the online marketing, which is what I worked on, was very cheap and very underdeveloped, which was good for us because we knew how to do it. So we could buy the traffic. It was so cheap. It was unbelievable. And it was it was very sort of naive in a way, which was a bit like, it was almost like Wild West in the work, Like, I remember first of all, I went to MSN China when they opened, and they're like, you cannot possibly charge this little for the traffic. It was virtually free because we've been buying traffic in Japan. It was like, oh my God, so we just started buying an enormous amount of traffic. And the other thing was that you could, and like when Weibo started a few years later, they just gave us 250,000 followers. Here's an account, just like that. And then someone came up with, let's make like pink umbrellas and give it to the traffic assistants in Shanghai. And someone just gave it to them and without paying. And now the entire city of Shanghai was dressed in these pink umbrellas with our logotype on. So it was like, and I think someone convinced the metro to call out and say, oh, here comes this and that station with the EF school. So it was really like a Wild West thing, and everything was kind of cheap and free. And so as a consequence, it was really fun to work with that. I wasn't just on an online one, but it was just be part of that was just amazing. And then the brand went from completely unknown to in 3 years be the strongest brand in the country for an education. And the volumes were just amazing. I mean, NetEase told us once that one of the emails that my team was sending was the largest emails in China. Like we reached more Chinese people every month than anyone else in the entire country with this email that my team produced. So it was really, really fun. And that obviously has completely changed. Yep. I think, now online is super expensive. It's much, much, much harder. Another thing, I think a big difference is that the average foreigner back then was not very good. Because China still at the time had sort of low self-esteem and thought every foreigner knew everything better. So we brought in, you could meet so many kind of loser foreigners here with jobs they shouldn't have and girlfriends they shouldn't have mostly, and that is all gone too. Like now it's, if you're going to be a foreigner in China, it's really much, it requires a lot more, which, as it should, as it would in any developed nation. But these things is
changed a lot.
The big differences, I think.
You spent 13 years with the EF. It's really long time. What did it actually keep you there? Is it passion? Is it the mission of the company, or team, or good pay?
Well, I don't like education, so it's amazing that I stayed so long there. I really did not like education. It's funny, but the main reason was really the people. It was incredibly fun to work for. It's they're so good at recruiting both smart and very social people. Because the actual company has been around for 50 years, is a travel company. So it's a very much of like very social people, and they also have, so it's like fun. You do a lot of offsite, and they're very generous to their staff. So you could every offsite like conference was wherever in the world, like pick a place. So we could like go to Sao Paulo, to Cape Town, to wherever, London, and it was like the world was, and it was just very global. All your colleagues were from all over the world. You're constantly in touch with everyone 24/7. It's really vibrant. So I really liked that part. I loved that part, and I met so many smart people. I remember when I joined, and I was like, oh my God, everyone's so smart here. Everyone like came from Harvard and was just from Ivy League schools or had worked for McKinsey or whatever. It's just like, Jesus, this is amazing. That was really fun. And the other part was the growth. It was just being part of that, the crazy growth. We went from 100 people to 8,000 people in something like
That's
8 years.
massive.
Yeah, it was insane. So just giving chances to a guy like me, gave me sort of a vice president role. So I mean, it was nothing special, but it was just meant that I was part of it. And I felt like I'm part of building this stuff. So it was a unicorn, but it's just that because it's a private company, nobody knew about it. But I looked at our metrics, we were larger and grew faster than many of the unicorns. It's just the business press didn't know about it. So that is, of course, is fantastic to be part of such an experience. Yeah. So.
How did you transition so you've been more on the content creating, content marketing, web, software. Mm-hmm. How did you transition to actually manufacturing the IoT device manufacturing?
Well, that was mainly because of, so back in the days when I was a visionary salesperson for internet, looking at those trajectories of how everything would be developing, the big thing was really going into Internet of Things, even though that was not the term back then. But it was, if you think about it, what we were working on back in the 90s was really one very insignificant product, which is like the PC, right? So, and then came the mobile phone. That's just two devices, the telephone and the PC. If you go back to pre-internet in the 90s, these are two very insignificant things. One is essentially a souped-up typewriter and a gaming device. The other is the telephone. So two devices were connected, and the world just changed. So imagine, and I mean this. Back early days, we could see what would happen when everything is connected, because obviously that was going to happen. So I've been sort of waiting for this IoT era. I thought it would come 10 years ago, and now it's starting. So for me, getting also tired of working just with PC and mobile, this is when the fun really begins, when we go into sort of a Harry Potter world. So I really wanted to work on other devices. And building, when you create things, you want to work not just with those two devices, but with everything. Internet can be omnipresent. And that is, from a creative perspective, which is what I am mainly, a creator, is amazing. It's like you've been given, first you had one tool, a PC, then you were given a mobile tool, that's two, and now you're getting like everything. Everything is now being connected. So it's just a much more fun sort of thing. But that poses challenges, because now we have to understand physical devices, which I had no experience in. So.
And that leads to the next question. Tell me more about the VÄRM company, cooking automation. Where does your inspiration coming from, and what are you trying to achieve with the device?
Well, the basics is that, going back to also my trajectory and the visionary thing, is that I started learning to analyze businesses, because that's what I was doing. What's going to happen next? So I felt, maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but I felt like I could predict the podcast boom very early on, which I have on record actually, that I had mail interaction with the people in the radio industry and banking with mobile payments, and so I felt like I wasn't alone in that. But just when you worked like that back in the days, you could see where it's heading. Given bandwidth, of course, Blockbuster would go under. Of course, you're going to have something like Spotify eventually. I don't know what the name would be, but so now I've had that confidence, and I look at what's going to happen now with IoT. Well, obviously, other industries are going to go the same way as the entertainment industry went, and banking industry, and newspaper industry. So what is the biggest industry in the world? Well, it's the food industry. The food industry is 16% of global GDP or something. And so I was like, that's where I'm going to work. I don't know what. And then I looked closer at the industry, and I saw how hopelessly bad they are at IT and how incredibly arrogant they are. They think that, especially the kitchen appliance industry, they seem to think that they can get away with building a high-end Gaggenau oven with a computer that looks like it's from the 70s. So anyway, that was where I started, picked that industry. And then I had an idea for what to do. I want to build a proper automation device to really solve cooking problems, which is not really to cook for yourself, but is to eat better at home or, yeah. So, but you want me to describe what it is?
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, what is it?
Oh, so it's just like basically it's a device designed for a computer to cook food rather than taking what you now see in the IoT world, which is a oven made for humans that you put a computer on, which won't properly work. It's kind of like trying to take a car from built in the 50s and make it self-driving. You have to actually fundamentally build the oven or the device to be run by a computer. And so that's what we have done. So it's a very complicated machine with tons of different, you can boil water in it, you can cook multiple things at the same time. It's extremely precise. Just make food perfect, and then you press a button. It's kind of like the equivalent of a self-driving car, but in the kitchen. Yeah, it's
Before we jump to the next company that you are running at the moment, can you please introduce a little bit about the concept of Cofactory? Because I think this is not new concept, but lots of people don't know about it.
Yeah, well, it's fairly new. There are some variations to it, but basically it's like a co-working space, but for factories. So like now when we're entering this IoT era, all these companies now need to make very sophisticated devices that need to be supplied by someone who acts more like an IT company. And so we provide a factory. We set up a factory, small, from 200 square meters, and we just put everything in there, staff, equipment. We handle it. Our customer can decide how much they want to do. And so if they want to have they have complete control, obviously, but if they want to put their own manager in there, they can do that. And then we run the factory. So something in between having your own factory and working with an outsourced contractor. So it's, yeah.
I'm curious to know, how did you land actually this deal? How did you manage to open the Cofactory in Changzhou?
Well, I was like, I don't know, I think I made a pitch deck for this idea. I often have ideas and I just pitch them because I think it's fun with ideas, and I wasn't really that interested in doing it, but people were very positive about this. One of our investors in my other company was like, "Do you have to do this?" So, and then Changzhou government, someone from there, I forget exactly how it happened, but they're like, "Whoa, we want to help with this." So I came over there, I met them, they were very supportive, and we got lots of help. So we decided, even though I originally wanted to set it up in Dongguan or Shenzhen, the Changzhou government was so much faster and very supportive. So then it was like, all right, let's just open it here. So we opened in January this year, a factory and an office, and now we're building up our sales organization. Yeah, so that's the...
Who are your typical clients?
Small IoT startups and for our factory deal, but that's not really started yet because of the borders are being shut. And then mid-sized companies for our R&D offer and our sourcing offer, which is what we have as well.
What are the recent trends in manufacturing in China, and what do you think if China is going to remain the factory of the world in the foreseen future?
The biggest changes is automation in the small to medium-sized factories. That's what's going to happen next. They're very, very simple at this point. So the biggest change, and that's what China really has to be able to do, is to automate or at least implement the operations program for small and medium-sized companies. The small ones cannot afford like the big systems from Oracle and IBM and so on. And the other is that you need to treat the workers better because it's still manual for a long time, and now all the workers are going to DD and that. So there's a immediate shortage of workers actually, which people never talk about. So but I think China will continue because they're just superior in manufacturing, and all the suppliers are here. So it's going to be I mean, we tried to make stuff in the US. It's just 3 times as expensive. It's just extremely hard because the electronic industry is here. It's not in the US. It's never been there. So yeah, China, East Asia will continue being dominant for a foreseeable future in this. Yeah.
And a quick follow-up question. So you managed to open it in Changzhou, right? Which is super far from Shenzhen, and Shenzhen or Guangzhou is famous for manufacturing facilities for hardware. Do you think it's going to be a challenge for you to bring the manufacturing smaller companies to Changzhou, to the area where not is that famous for manufacturing?
It is a bit challenged, but quickly people realize that that you don't need to be like we do assembly, and the parts suppliers are to a large degree in the south, but there are also many here. But it's no practical difference in shipping from Shenzhen to Shanghai or to Changzhou versus Shanghai or Shenzhen to Dongguan, for example. It's super fast, so it doesn't stop anything. And Changzhou has the advantage of being in the middle of the country. So if you ship to entire China. It's actually many companies use this for warehousing. So to have it an assembly factory is actually a great location. But I agree. Originally I was like, this isn't going to work. But now I think we're going to open in Dongguan eventually as well. But it's actually a very good location for logistics purposes. It's fantastic. So yeah.
When can we visit the factory?
Whenever you want. You can come and visit.
So it's already open and you're onboarding companies.
We're building it now. They built a building, or we didn't build a building, but now we're doing the internal. We were a bit delayed because of the extremely complex safety rules. It's just we kept delaying and delaying because if something happens, I go to jail basically. So I'm super paranoid about everything has to be detailed, and you get conflicting messages all the time. So we have to get lawyers involved, and I think we're 2 months delayed because of this. So but now we're starting to build our factory, and I think the onboarding depends entirely on when the borders open, because we've been selling in Europe, but we're going to start opening the China market now, and I think then we can move companies in sooner than when the borders open. So we will see. We're starting sales in China now in August. So we shall see how that goes. But
thank you, Rasmus. Thank you very much. I wish the best of luck to the company and have as many startups as possible in the near future.
Thank you.
And I'm going to visit definitely, probably next interview we're going to do actually at the factory, and so people can see the space and if they like to join the company. Thank you so much. That was In China Between Meetings with Rasmus Rasmusson, CEO and founder of VÄRM and LeWorks. Please like, share and comments, and we see you next time.